Hey everyone, welcome back and happy Wednesday. So today you are going to be learning about recording and reporting, which are important things that you do as a healthcare worker. We're going to be talking about the different senses that you use when recording and reporting information, how you report that information, and the difference between subjective versus objective observations. The first way that we make observations is using our sense of sight. And this can include looking at the color of someone's skin. Maybe it's red and flushed, or maybe it has a bruise that is visible. We look at swelling and edema. Edema is just a fancy medical word for swelling. So maybe we can tell that a certain area of the body is more swollen than others. Maybe we can see some fluid buildup in certain areas of the body. We look for rashes and sores. We can also use our sense of sight to observe the color of urine. We can see if it is really pale, if it's really dark, meaning they might be dehydrated, or maybe that it has blood in it. We can also observe stool or feces and see if there are any observations that can be made from that as well. And we can look to see the amount of food that someone has eaten. If they are not eating a lot, that could be a sign of some type of illness. Or maybe they're eating a lot of food and they're constantly hungry as well. Our sense of smell can be used to determine things like body odor, as well as sensing any unusual odors on a person's breath, any unusual odors coming from a wound, or unusual odors coming from urine or stool. A fun fact is actually if you smell a sweet smell coming off of someone's breath, like very overly sweet, that could actually be an indication of diabetes. A sense of touch is what we use to determine things like pulse. So we use our own hands to feel for someone's pulse. We also can use touch to feel whether someone's skin is really dry, or if it's really warm, or if it's really cold. We can also use that to feel whether someone is perspiring or sweating, and we can feel for swelling in certain areas that may not be obvious to the eyes. Sometimes we can feel it with our hands. You use your sense of hearing to listen for respiration sounds, to listen to lung sounds. You can also listen for abnormal body sounds such as coughing. You use your sense of hearing to listen to someone's speech, and you also use your sense of hearing in the process of measuring someone's blood pressure. There are two different types of observations. There are subjective versus objective, and you're going to be doing an assignment today where you determine the difference between these two. Subjective are what we refer to as symptoms, and these are things that we cannot see or touch. These are statements typically that patients come in and tell us, and they're typically feelings. So I have a headache, I feel nauseous, I don't feel good, I feel dizzy. These are all subjective symptoms. Objective observations are what we determine as signs of illness, and these are things that we can see or can be measured. So we can see a bruise, a cut, a rash. We can measure someone's blood pressure. We can measure their temperature and actually get a number. These are objective signs. An example of how something could be subjective and turned into objective would be if someone came in and said, I feel nauseous. That is a subjective symptom. But if someone were to come into the ER and visibly throw up in front of you, then that would be an objective sign. Nausea, subjective. Vomiting, objective. The basic rules for recording information would be to record information that is always accurate, concise, and complete. Of course, everything that you record about a patient needs to be accurate because you are using this to determine what is wrong with them. This is a legal medical document, and it's going to be referred to back in the future if there were to ever be any complications. Concise means try to keep it short and simple and easy to understand. And complete means do not leave out any important details. Writing, if you're writing a physical written record, always needs to be neat and legible, but most often today we are using electronic medical records. Pretty much all doctors' offices and hospitals have changed over to electronic. But that also means that your spelling and grammar need to be correct, and not all applications have spell check that you can rely on. So you always need to be paying attention to what you're writing. And only objective observations should be noted in the official medical record. So those things that could be measured and seen, objective signs of illness are what are put in the medical record. You can use subjective symptoms that people kind of use and explain to you to work your way up to those objective observations. When you're recording a patient's statements, you need to write them in their own words and put them in quotation marks. So the patient came in complaining of nausea, or the patient said, "I feel dizzy," in quotation marks. You also want to make sure that you sign all medical records with your name and your title. Again, if it's a written record, you'll sign it this way. If it's an electronic medical record, typically you have a login or a password that you use to log into the system, and that will denote who was recording that information because you signed in with that information. Any errors, if they are written physically on a record, need to be crossed out with one straight line, as you see on the screen, and then write error, and then your initials, and then write the correct thing next to it or below it or around it. So this says CO pain in neck, but they misspelled neck. They wrote NCK. So they crossed it out with one line, they wrote error, they put their initials, KS, and then next to it they corrected it and put neck. Complains of pain in neck, spelled correctly. The reason this is important is because you could have put patient weighs 143 pounds, and what you really meant to write was patient weighs 134 pounds. So you need to always go back and make those corrections because the dosage of medication and things like that could be really important in knowing how much they weigh. If it's a electronic medical record, typically they will not allow you to delete things from the record. In some cases they will, some things they won't, but instead you will go in and write, or you'll click a button that says error, and then you'll correct it on the computer. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is HIPAA, which you've probably heard me mention before, but it's very important in the medical field, and you'll hear it a lot throughout your 3 years of taking my classes. HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And it's a strict set of standards that we are using to maintain confidentiality of healthcare records. HIPAA was created in 1996, which wasn't that long ago. That was 24 years ago, because I was born in 1996 and I am 24 years old. And so it's really not that old of an act, but it is so important to the medical field. To imagine that 24 years ago, there was no real legal act in place to protect patient information is kind of crazy. The way HIPAA works is basically once you turn 18, you go to the doctor and they're going to give you a form that you have to fill out, and you have to include anyone on that form that you are willing to have your information shared with. So for example, if I went to the doctor and I did not want my mom to have access to my medical records for whatever reason, I would not put her on the form. That means if she tried to call the doctor and say, "Hey, I know my daughter was just there, what's wrong with her?" they are not legally allowed to tell her because she is not on the HIPAA form. Patients must be able to see and obtain their own records, and they have control over who sees them. And healthcare workers must protect the privacy of patient records following all HIPAA regulations. And you'll learn a lot more about HIPAA if you ever actually get a job working in healthcare. That is everything for today. Very quick, simple, easy notes. You do have a subjective versus objective assignment that you're going to complete, and then your journal and your daily quiz. And I hope you have a great Wednesday. Reach out if you need anything, and I will see you all later. Bye, guys.